Hello, welcome. I have something I would like to show you guys. This quilt right here is a unique situation. It has all of these nice zigzag edges that could pose a lovely challenge for somebody, but that person's not going to be me. So, though I would like to show you a difference in math comparison if you would like to tackle a quilt like this. I guess there's two options you can do when you're binding this. You can either just chop it off and have nice four sides to the quilt, or you can keep the zigzag edges and bind with that. It is a decent difference in fabric, but I did the math for you so that it would be easy to sway your mind whether you want to do something like this. I probably will never do one like this, especially with size blocks like this and how large the quilt is. Now, if the quilt was a 10-inch block quilt, maybe I would consider that, but not this, which I did just do a grandmother's flower garden quilt that was hand-pieced in the 1930s, and I thought that could not be chopped off. That kind of would have broke my heart and probably would have broke the person's heart that let me quilt it and bind it. So I did keep that. It did not have this many angles though, so that was doable. The sides were bigger, that's what I did. So, but the first option would be on this would be to chop it off. So each of these blocks is a 3-inch block. So for the width of the, I guess it's technically like in a triangle, it's called the hypotenuse. So this, you can either measure it or you can use Pythagorean theorem, which I use Pythagorean theorem. So just to give me an exact number. So for a 3-inch block, my hypotenuse is 4.24 repeating for the sake of math and quilt ease, I'm going to round that up to 4.25. So for my 4.25 width right here, I do then have to take into account seam allowance on each of these sides. So my seam allowance is going to be 1/4 of an inch, so 1/2 inch for each 4.25 block. I did go ahead and count the number of blocks this way and this way. So horizontal, there are 24 blocks, there are 26 blocks going vertical. So I'm going to take my the length of each of these areas in each of my squares, which is now 4.25 minus 0.5 to take away my seam allowance. So this is going to be 3.75. So I will then take my 3.75 times 24, because that's how many blocks I have, and that equals 90. And then for the long ways, it is 3.75 times 26, which then comes out to be 97.5. In order to then get my perimeter, I'm going to add 90 plus 90 plus 97.5 plus 97.5, which is going to give me 375 as my perimeter. I then am going to divide that by my width of fabric. So I like to say that my width of fabric is always 40 inches, because you never know with the selvages how small or large they are, and 40 is usually a safe number for me. So I like to say then my 375, which is my perimeter, divided by 40, which is my width of fabric, to get the number of strips that I want for my binding. So that is going to give me 9.375. Since my 9.375 is less than 9.5, I'm just going to round it up to 10. That's easy. So I need 10 strips of fabric for this option. I'm then going to take my 10 strips of fabric times 2.5, because that's the width that I like my binding to be. And so that then comes out to be 25 inches of fabric, which then I would then purchase 3/4 of a yard of fabric for this option. Now, if I were to do the hard option and just keep all the zigzags, I now have double the amount of sides that I'm accounting for. So for a 3-inch block, instead of a 3-inch side, you're now in one block, you're now accounting 2 3-inch sides. So 3 plus 3 is 6. I then also only have seam allowance on one of the sides because this point right here doesn't have a seam allowance. So for two sides like this, you're only taking out 2 seam allowances instead of 4 seam allowances that you would, comparatively take out for this sort of a situation. So I'm going to take 3 plus 3, which is 6, take out 2 seam allowances, so 1/2 inch, 1/4 plus 1/4 equals 1/2, and that comes out to be 5.5 inches. So for each square, I need to take in account a side that is 5.5 inches. So I have 24 squares this way, so 24 times 5.5 is 132. 26 of my squares this way times 5.5 is 143. I'm going to add those up. So 132, 132, 143, 143 all together is 550. I will now take my 550 divided by 40, which is my width of fabric off of the bolt that I always calculate with, so it's easy. And that tells me that I need 13.75 strips of fabric. You could round up to 14. You're probably going to be cutting it close. So I always then, my rule is like if it's above 0.5, the decimal, I round up to the next whole number plus 1, just to make sure I have enough fabric for all of my fabric junctions while I'm sewing my strips together. So 13.75, I'm rounding up to 15, not 14. So I'm going to say that I need 15 strips of fabric for this option times my 2.5, which is my width of fabric, width of fabric that I like for my binding strips to be. Yes. Which then tells me I need 37.5 inches of fabric purchased for my binding, which you would then purchase 1 yard and 1/8 of fabric. So you either would need, for the chop off option, 3/4 of a yard, or the nice, lovely zigzag option, 1 yard and 1/8 of fabric. Again, I will probably never do that option just because that does not sound appealing to me. You have a lot of in and out angles. I don't like the corners. That's not my favorite part of binding. I like the nice straight edges. So it would take a lot of extra time that I don't want to have to commit to this. I would not find it to be enjoyable. So, though I hope that kind of gives you an idea. It's not quite double the amount of fabric you would need, but it is a decent amount more. Time-wise, it's probably triple, quadruple the amount more time, maybe even longer, that it would take to do something like this. So, if you've ever done one of these, I think it'd be cool to see a picture just because I probably will never do one. So, thank you. Hopefully that was helpful.